This is a special edition of ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Good evening. Some people here in Washington tonight, people who ought to know what they're talking about, are saying privately that a deal has been struck, that the hostages will be released on Monday. But no one connected with the negotiations will say that publicly, and for good reason. No written agreement has been exchanged yet. In fact, the final language for such an agreement is still being drafted here in Washington. And until that language, with all its nuance and detail, is accepted by the Iranians, there is only that most tantalizing of diplomatic achievements, an agreement in principle, a deal that is all but concluded. But they are beginning to dot the I's and cross the T's tonight, and as diplomatic correspondent Barry Dunsmore reports, they're still working into the night to get it wrapped up, fast.
Top Carter administration officials and representatives of 12 major U.S. banks have apparently hammered out a final financial deal for Iran after some 11 hours of meetings here at the State Department. As he left the talks, Treasury Secretary G. William Miller said the draft of this proposal would be sent out tonight so that Iran would have it tomorrow morning. In one of several conversations with reporters, Secretary Miller explained in general terms what it was that the banks and Treasury officials were trying to achieve.
That no one wants to make an agreement in which there is so much vagueness that there could later be an abortion of the agreement because of the misperceptions of the amounts. If you and I are going to settle our bills and you have a different idea of what I owe you and I have a different idea of what you owe me, we never can make an agreement. So it's important that we know where we stand.
Mr. Secretary.
And it's important that that be clear so that the other elements can be dealt with.
The problem is basically this. Iran concedes it owes the banks a lot of money and is willing to have them keep enough to cover those loans until they can be renegotiated. However, Iran wants immediately what it calculates are its net assets in European branches of American banks. The stickler is that there is a substantial difference between what Iran claims and what the banks say are the net assets. Today's marathon meeting and the proposal which came out of it were an attempt to bridge that final gap in the search for a solution to the hostage crisis. Ted?
Thank you, Barry. It is ironic but true that the complex state of U.S.-Iranian finances is a result of Iran's long-standing and close relationship with the United States before the Khomeini regime took over. And it's therefore not surprising that straightening it all out is no easy matter. Here's a report from our financial correspondent, Mike Connor.
November 4th, 1979. Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. American hostages are taken. November 14th, 10 days later, Jimmy Carter freezes about $9 billion in Iranian assets. Now it appears the Iranians are about to release the remaining 52 American hostages. What they want in return is their money. Releasing the hostages is a simple matter, but unfreezing the assets has proved more complicated. Almost $5 billion of Iran's money, for example, is on deposit in the overseas branches of American banks. But Iran also has about $2 billion in loans outstanding from those banks. And the banks have feared that if they gave back Iran's deposits, Iran might not pay back the loans. The apparent compromise, reached after months of negotiation, subtract the loans from the deposits and return the balance to Iran. Another $2.2 billion of Iran's money is in the form of gold and securities at New York's Federal Reserve Bank. This is probably the easiest to return, and today moves were underway to make that money easily available when the hostages are released. But more than $2 billion of Iran's money won't be released anytime soon. More than 3,000 lawsuits and claims have been filed against Iran's assets. These will have to be settled by an international claims commission to which Iran has already agreed. Complicating the situation even more is a fundamental disagreement over how much money is at stake. Iran has said its assets in the U.S. total $14 billion, far higher than the American estimate of $9 billion. In the end, experts say, the financial and legal tangle created by the freezing of the assets may take years to unravel. Michael Connor, ABC News, New York.
Aside from the hostages themselves and their families, the person most intimately involved in the hostage crisis, the man who has staked the most on their safe return, is the President of the United States. White House correspondent Sam Donaldson reports.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Mrs. Carter.
President Carter, walking into the White House East Room to present Medals of Freedom as one of the final acts of his presidency, was clearly a man holding his breath on the hostage deal. Anticipating success from all signs, but unable to announce it until Iran okays the final language of the agreement, language Washington was planning to transmit to Tehran tonight. But as Mr. Carter awarded a medal to the absent Deputy Secretary of State Warren Christopher, his emotion came through.
I might say that Warren Christopher is in Algiers, working as he has for the last 14 months for the freedom of American hostages. He's listening to my voice through an open telephone line. The members of the press asked me, of all the public servants with whom you have served as president, who would you rank number one? And I didn't hesitate a moment. I said, Warren Christopher.
The president didn't say where Christopher's work stood, but White House counsel Lloyd Cutler told reporters that Iran had asked the United States to draft final language of an agreement. And, said Cutler, if Iran accepts the language, the deal could be announced tomorrow. Press Secretary Jody Powell was more cautious, calling tonight's communication to Iran a response, but acknowledging that if the Iranians accept the response, we will have an agreement. Powell cautioned that until the Iranians agree, the matter is still open, but he conceded that the order to begin positioning Iranian assets is an indication of U.S. optimism. The president himself flew off for his last weekend at Camp David, but he is certainly prepared to fly back to announce an agreement. And his aides left open the possibility that if the hostages are released in a time frame that would allow him to fly to Europe to meet them, he may do it. So what appears to be happening tonight is that the United States and Iran have agreed on the essential elements of a deal. But Iran must still approve the final language contained in tonight's Washington response, and the logistics for freeing a sufficient amount of frozen Iranian assets must still be completed. Could it all go sour? Of course. Nothing is certain till it's done. But this time, the feeling here, certainly the hope here, is that it's going to get done. Ted?
Thank you very much, Sam. We'll be back to you a little later in this broadcast. Tuesday, just 3 days away now, and Ronald Reagan will occupy the White House. And despite all signs that an agreement is at hand, the hostage issue could still be his to resolve. Susan King reports on Mr. Reagan and the current negotiating efforts.
Until today, President-elect Reagan and his advisors have wanted and received only general briefings on the negotiations. But this morning, Reagan said he was getting hour-by-hour updates. And from what he had learned, Reagan was willing to all but endorse the proposed Carter settlement.
If what I understand, if it is true that I was told what I understood, yes, I thought that made sense.
But late today, as the details of the agreement became known, Reagan moved away from any commitments. Rather than words, Reagan answered with shrugs. Though a Reagan spokesman insisted there is no gag rule in effect, the Reagan team has clearly decided to leave the hostage issue in Carter's lap. General Alexander Haig brushed past reporters' questions. So did Reagan's chief counsel, Ed Meese. Only Richard Allen, who as foreign affairs advisor has been the chief contact with the Carter people on Iran, would say that these last-minute intense negotiations did not raise a problem.
Judged on the participation and the cooperation that we've had with the Carter administration, I wouldn't think that this situation would merit any more special attention than we've seen thus far.
Allen heads a Reagan transition task force which focuses on Iran. But who takes over responsibility for the negotiations if they continue next Tuesday is not clear. Haig, if he is confirmed as Secretary of State, will inherit the job, and sources indicate he wants his own people. And there are no indications that Warren Christopher, key in these present negotiations, would stay on after the inauguration. There has been cynical grumbling in Reagan circles that if a settlement comes this weekend, Reagan will star in the $8 million inauguration that no one cares about. But clearly a hostage solution would be a boom to the Reagan team, freeing them from one of the country's most frustrating problems. Susan King, ABC News, the Blair House.
In a moment, we'll talk live with correspondent Lou Chiaffi in Algiers.
Can't breathe.
You didn't take your contact, did you?
No.
And you are going to work today. That's my man. Keep going.
Charge.
You choose. Label says take this, but only when you stay home. Take this, and you'll need 6 for just today.
6?
Or take this one little contact.
That settles it. But what's this improved?
That's good. Means you'll get all their decongestant without their pain and cough things.
I'll phone you from the office.
Contact is the keeps-you-going cold medicine.
Hello.
Every 747 starts out roomy, but in most airlines' business sections, they don't end up that way. Well, now one does. Introducing TWA's new Ambassador class to Europe. Just 6 seats across. Seats that are wider with more legroom than any other airlines. TWA's new Ambassador class. It's roomy enough for anybody.
Even my body. You're gonna like us, TWA.
Tonight's a hot night. Guest host Shelley Winters plus the Plasmatics want you to join in the late night fun.
And to ignore that stupid shrimp on your right.
Next on Friday.
It was 10 days ago that Deputy Secretary of State Warren Christopher suddenly and hurriedly took off for Algiers on the mission that has now brought the end of the hostage crisis in sight. Throughout this period, Algiers has been the focal point of the negotiations, the transmission center via Algerian diplomats for messages passing between the United States and Iran. And it is most probably in Algiers that Iran's final word on an agreement will first be received. Lou Chiaffi is standing by there now. Lou?
Ted, there's certainly an air of a hopeful expectancy here in Algiers as all the signs continue to point to a settlement of this crisis after such a long and painful period. The 2 delegations of financial and political experts from both the United States and Algeria met throughout the day and well into the night, trying to agree on the complicated financial arrangements that can satisfy both American law and the Iranian demands. The feeling here, as it seems to be in the United States, is that only technical details have to be worked out before the long-awaited agreement on the release of the hostages is reached. The chief U.S. negotiator, Warren Christopher, was one of the last to leave the meetings today, but his work here is still not finished. That really depends on what's been decided in Tehran and in Washington, where you are, Ted.
Lou, I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of how this will, how will it play out from here as far as Algiers is concerned? What role are the Algerians going to play?
Well, the Algerians have worked very, very hard for the last year trying to be the intermediary between the United States and Iran. They've done everything in the United Nations, outside the United Nations, to stay friendly with both the U.S. and Iran to act as mediator. And obviously the one thing they really, I think, want at this point, and the man in the street here in Algiers is saying that, they want the hostages to come from Iran here to Algiers first, where they'll first taste freedom.
You mean to underscore the role that they've been playing?
Indeed, yes, because Algeria has been playing a traditional role here in North Africa and in the Muslim world. They've wanted to be the bridge between the Western world and the Muslim world, and, if you will, a bridge in the Muslim world itself. And this is the culmination of a long period of expectancy here in Algiers.
All right, Lou, as you've been hearing throughout this broadcast, our understanding is that they are preparing now the text of an agreement that will be cabled there to Algiers sometime tonight. Physically, what happens to that then? Who gets it? How do they pass it on?
Well, it comes here to Algiers, and then it will be sent on by the Algerian government to Iran. I am presuming at this point that the Iranians have let the Algerians know what the name of the game is. That's what they're trying to work out here in Algiers, the final fine wording of the final agreement, and they will get the word from Iran and will pass on to Warren Christopher, and that will be hopefully the end of the crisis.
Okay, Lou, I hope you'll stand by and join us a little bit later in this broadcast again. Joining us now from Chicago is Professor Marvin Zonas of the University of Chicago, a specialist in Islamic studies and a longtime student of Iranian affairs. Put some of that long-time study to work, would you please, Dr. Zonas? Where are we now? Why, after you've been telling us all along that the Iranians are not going to give in to the pressure of Ronald Reagan becoming president, why does it seem as though the inauguration is playing such a massive role after all?
It's a fascinating development, and there certainly has been a consolidation of power in Iran, which has resulted, I believe, in this hostage crisis. Beginning back in September, when Ayatollah Khomeini first spoke of the need to resolve the hostage crisis, there had been mounting pressures in Iran to do so. I think there have been 2 additional factors besides Khomeini's decision, which have led to this imminent release, perhaps. One is the war with Iraq, which has put Iran very much on the defensive, both for spare parts and for money. And the second was, as you suggest, the inauguration of the defeat of President Carter and the inauguration of President-elect Reagan, which has left the Iranians to understand that they had better deal with this known commodity than the unknown and rather threatening President Reagan.
Throughout the long ups and downs over the past 15 months, Dr. Zonas, you've been right far more often than you've been wrong. What does your nose tell you now? Is it happening? Is this really it?
I must admit that I feel that more optimistic than I've ever felt, and I think there's a good reason to believe this is it. I think there are some potential obstacles of which we should be aware of, which one would be forces in Iran opposed to the release of the hostages who may use this moment to act for internal disruption in Iran. I would say that the greatest danger the hostages face is right now. Forces acting against the central government in Iran who may take this moment to, for example, physically injure the hostages as a way of trying to bring American retaliation against the central authorities. It's a tricky moment.
I'm not sure whether you're just raising something that is a vague hypothetical possibility or something you're genuinely fearful will happen.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that I am genuinely fearful, but there are certainly guerrilla forces in Iran who would like to overthrow the central regime, who would like at the same time to bring American wrath down on Iran to facilitate that. And I would be, if I were an Iranian official, extremely careful about the security of the hostages and extremely relieved once they got safely out of my country.
All right, please stand by and feel free to jump in this conversation. I'd like to bring in my two colleagues, Barry Dunsmore and Sam Donaldson. Barry, first of all, to you, the message that is going out tonight, the cable that will be sent to Algiers and from then on to Iran, what is the nature of that they could theoretically respond as quickly as tomorrow? Wouldn't that be something they'd have to study in great detail?
I understand, Ted, that the United States government has a very good sense of what is acceptable in Tehran. We're talking about sums of money. It's in the range of $2.5 to $3 billion. And I think it looks as though when you finally have to make a decision as to which way you're going to go, the difference isn't that great that you would reject the agreement totally because of some relatively slight difference in the two positions. I would like to pick up, if I could, however, Ted, on some of the remarks that Dr. Zonas just made, because one of the reasons that State Department officials have been so cautious throughout this entire period is precisely because of some of the things that he has suggested. The United States government does not know for certain who is in control of the hostages. It does not know precisely what is going to happen even when an agreement is reached. Now, it is assumed that the government has control. It's assumed that the hostages will be let out. But there are forces there about which the United States knows very little, and what he suggests conceivably could happen is something that does worry people in this building.
Sam Donaldson, all along it has seemed that the extreme caution has been coming out of the State Department, and perhaps for political reasons there has been more of a sense of optimism out of the White House. Today, great caution coming out of the White House. What's your interpretation of their reading of what's happening?
Well, today's caution from the White House, I think, is just the obvious cautionary note one would want to always make, Ted. I think they're still very optimistic here, and you're quite right. The politicians have been optimistic this week. They're here in the White House. The career servants have been rather cautious and even pessimistic earlier in the week, as Barry Dunsmore knows, over at the State Department. The president can taste this. That's not a very elegant way of saying it, and of course those are not his words, they are mine. He wants it so badly, and he can taste it, and he thinks he has the deal made. Now, when I say he wants it so badly and he can taste it, there was a column in many papers this morning by the syndicated columnists Evans and Novak, which suggested that Mr. Carter had ordered that a deal be made at all costs. They resent that here. They say that it's nonsense. What we're talking about is the frozen Iranian assets that belong to Iran, and as Barry Dunsmore and Mike Connors and others have suggested, a mechanism for freeing a sufficient amount. That we're not giving away United States money. The federal treasury is not going to pay for this deal. We're simply returning to Iran, we hope, in some form acceptable to Iran, what we froze a year ago November. But the president wants the deal. Clearly, he would like to go out of office, saying, as they have said previously here, it happened on our watch, and we have completed it on our watch, and the hostages are back.
I have to ask either you or Barry, and I don't know which of you wants to answer a technical question. We're dealing here with an agreement. Is someone ultimately going to sign this thing? I mean, is there going to be a formal signing ceremony? Does the president have to sign it? Does the Ayatollah Khomeini or Prime Minister Rajaei have to sign it?
Well, I'll take a crack at it if I may, and you can disagree with me, Barry. I think earlier reports that something would be actually signed and exchanged that way have now given way to the belief that there will not be formal signings, there will not be signatures. The Iranians want their money. If they see that money in the escrow account and they think the amount is sufficient, that's good enough for them, I believe.
Barry?
I would just add, Ted, that there are certain things that the president is going to have to sign, certain executive orders having to do with certain elements of the agreement, but there may not be a formal agreement per se that's signed in both capitals.
All right, gentlemen, would you all please stand by? In a moment, we'll talk live with the parents of one of the American hostages.
The secret of the Colombian coffee bean was passed from the grandfather of Juan Valdez to the father of Juan Valdez, and then to Juan. For in Colombia, it is an art to pick the coffee bean at the moment of perfect ripeness. It is an art that is passed from generation to generation to generation. It is no accident that Colombian coffee is the richest coffee in the world. It is a national heritage.
The dazzling world of Hyatt always welcomes you. Time after time, Hyatt's special service always makes your stay a rewarding experience. It's called a touch of Hyatt. For style and service, there's just nothing like Hyatt anywhere else. Come, capture the spirit worldwide. Hyatt Hotels.
Donald Cook, age 25, was vice consul at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and is one of the 52 American hostages. He was last seen in the picture of the hostages taken by Iranian television on Christmas Day. His parents, Professor Ernest Cook and Mrs. Susan Cook, are now standing by live at their home in Memphis. Dr. and Mrs. Cook, I'd like to put the shoe on the other foot. You are, in a sense, representative not only of all the hostage families tonight, but I think of many, if not all, American citizens, in that you must have a lot of questions. All of our experts are standing by at your disposal. Would you like to ask anything, or would you like to make any comment?
Well, I think I'd like to make a comment on something that Lou Chiaffi said. I'm not sure that I speak for all the American people and all the hostage families, but I think that I speak for a large number of them when I say that we are very appreciative of what the Algerians have done in this situation. I've talked to the Algerian ambassador to Washington and the Algerian ambassador to Iran and officials of the Algerian Foreign Office, and have expressed to them my personal gratitude for what they've done, and asked them to be patient in these very difficult times. And if it would be a symbolic gesture to have the hostages flown from Iran to Algeria, I hope that our government seriously considers that, because I think that we owe the Algerians a very important debt in this matter.
All right, well, Lou Chiaffi, Sam Donaldson, Barry Dunsmore, and Marvin Zonas are all standing by. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask any one of them?
Yeah, I have a question for Barry Dunsmore and Sam Donaldson. I'm still skeptical. I'm still scared stiff that something will happen to prevent the final release of the hostages this week. And I've been skeptical on all the other occasions. They have a sense of having talked to the people involved at the White House and at the State Department. And in their comments earlier, I had a feeling that there's a pretty good feeling in both of those places that something will happen. But I guess I really want to know their gut reaction to this situation. Do they really think the hostages are going to be released in the next couple of days?
All right, Barry, you're up first.
Mr. Cook, I can't help but share your concern and your skepticism. Certainly you have been through it at a more close range than I have, but those of us who have gone up and down on this thing so many times obviously feel skeptical, and we aren't sure, and we won't be sure until we know they're on a plane. But I think that generally speaking, people in this building have the feeling that this time it's actually going to work.
Sam?
Well, Professor Cook, when I used to cover then Governor Carter in his primary campaign in 1976, I never knew how the votes were going to come out, but I always had a feeling of how he thought they were going to come out. And if I may just pat myself on the back, I was quite often right. And last November, I had the feeling that he thought he was going to lose, and in fact, he did. With that as a predicate, let me just say that I think his gut feeling is that it's going to work, that it's going to work. Now, of course, the Iranians hold the key, and it could all mess up there, and it could all go sour. But as President Carter sits at Camp David tonight, I believe, although he has naturally not told me this, that he thinks it's going to happen.
All right, Mrs. Cook, I'd like to turn to you as the ultimate expert. I'd like to hear a mother's instinct. What do you think is going to happen?
I think this is it. I really think it's going to end in the next couple of days. I just have this feeling. I, too, am skeptical, and I'm really afraid to get my hopes up too high, and all day I've been very nervous about it, and I just feel like I've been holding my breath all day, waiting, and I really think that this is it. It looks good, I think.
All right. Well, I thank you all very much. I thank you, Professor and Mrs. Cook, most particularly, and I share your hopes, as I'm sure everyone does, that this really is it, and that finally the hostages are on their way back home, and your son in this instance most particularly. I thank also Dr. Marvin Zonas and Lou Chiaffi in Algiers, and of course Sam Donaldson at the White House, and Barry Dunsmore at the State Department. The final word in a moment.
There's Dan and Ellen Fields. He's editor of our local newspaper. He looks worried about his problem dandruff. I wish he'd ask me.
Mr. Owens, what shampoo should Dan use for his problem dandruff?
Ellen, how about Tegrin?
It works on itching and flaking?
In a national survey, 3 out of 4 dermatologists judge Tegrin's medication effective in fighting even problem dandruff.
Let's try it out.
Oh, how's Dan's problem dandruff?
Tegrin's terrific news, Mr. Owens.
Prove it to yourself. Tegrin works.
This magnificent animal stands for the broad range of insurance coverages from the Hartford. The Hartford can have you covered at home or on the road. The Hartford can have your business covered for losses and liabilities, and for your life and the lives of your employees. To protect your business, home, auto, or life, call an independent agent who represents the Hartford for a quote. The Hartford. Let us protect your world.
Dear Bright, thanks to you, my No-Wax floor looks fantastic.
Here's what lots of women are saying about Bright.
I just had to write, because I couldn't believe how Bright shines.
Bright cleaned my No-Wax floor, made it shine like new, without wax.
It cleans, it shines, Bright's wonderful.
The letters keep coming in, cause...
For a beautiful dynamite No-Wax shine. Nothing shines brighter than Bright.
The end of the crisis has never looked closer. During the past 440 days, the return of the hostages has never seemed this imminent. They're working at the State Department right now, drafting an agreement that will be cabled this very night to the Algerians, who will pass it on to the Iranians. And if it's accepted, the hostages will come home. Perhaps they will leave Iran as early as next Monday. It appears to be that close. Why can't the President or the Secretary of State say that publicly? Because there remains that awful possibility that the deal can still fall through. It's not complete, it's not final, it's not over, but it has never seemed closer. ABC News will be standing by all weekend long to report on any significant new developments as soon as they happen. That's our report for tonight. This is Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been a special edition of ABC News Nightline. Stay tuned to ABC throughout the weekend for news on the hostages. This has been a presentation of ABC News.
We'll begin our coverage of Ronald Reagan's inauguration Monday on Good Morning America.
A 10-4, my destination is Carpet Land. Kick it back.
Another truckload of carpet is headed for Baltimore's Carpetland showrooms. That means that during this 3-day carpet sale, you'll be able to save big because all of Carpetland's prices have been slashed. Nylon, multi-level, reduced to $5.95 a square yard. 100% nylon Saxony plush, reduced to just $7.95 a square yard. But hurry, this Carpetland truckload sale is for 3 days only.
Roger, D. We going bye-bye.
Hurry into any Carpetland showroom today.